Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most important science fiction films ever made, and that would, of course, be 2001 A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, written by Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. This movie was released in 1968. Well, what can you say about this movie? 2001 is maybe one of the most written about, not just most written about science fiction movies, but one of the most written about movies of all time. I don't think I have anything new to say about 2001, but it's a fun movie to talk about, though. Um, People's reactions to this movie are always interesting too. They just run the full width of the spectrum to people who watch this movie and talk about having a transcendent type of experience, to the other end of it, where some people would rather go for some root canal work than watch this film again. And that's one of the fascinating aspects of this film. But there's a lot that's fascinating about this movie. So I do want to talk a little bit about the genesis of the film. So I talked about Doctor Strangelove earlier, Kubrick's film that came out in 1964, and he got interested, wanted to do a science fiction movie, but wanted to elevate the genre a little bit, where to have a big budget, to have a very ambitious script, very ambitious ideas, and to try to make a science fiction film unlike any other. This is Kubrick would do this throughout his career, with The Shining. He was just intrigued with the idea. Well, let's make the scariest movie ever made, or with Barry Lyndon, let's make the most accurate historical film ever made. So as Kubrick's career moves along, the ambition continues to grow, and most would agree. I think 2001 is maybe his most watched film, his most important film, although I know that's debatable. It's the 1960s. We're in the space age. There's a lot of talk about space. It's just so much part of the culture of the 1960s, and the idea of harnessing the technology of film to tell a story, like a truly epic science fiction film, and that was the original goal of this film. Of course, Kubrick would work with Arthur C. Clarke, who was a highly regarded author of science fiction novels, and they began working on a story together, meeting a lot, discussing ideas, tossing ideas out, and like I said, there's been some really good books written about their collaboration and the entire making of this movie and all that. But they were working together, working ideas around, and from what I've understood, Clarke was working on a novel and a screenplay at the same time. So they on the one hand, there would be a novel, but there would also be a film, and I do have a paperback of the novel by Arthur C. Clarke, which is still in print and still widely read, I assume. It is different from the movie, as you would expect. You do get a little bit more information about the plot, and it does provide a lot more context from the movie. So if you are perplexed with the movie, and of course I was still perplexed by this movie, the book will maybe provide a little bit more, some clarity and a little bit more depth to the story. So they were done somewhat simultaneously, the script and the novel. And I think one of the aspects of the film, to just kind of get to the film itself, not to go into the making of the movie, I don't really want to get into that. Like I said, there's been a lot written on that, and that's a fascinating story in itself. I know it took a long time to make this movie. I mean, I think production started in late 1965, and it continued into 1968. So this was almost a two multi-year project that it took to get this film made. One way to think about the movie, though, I think the structure of the movie is really interesting, where it's really four movies we're getting. Three short films, one might say, and then one long narrative in between. So the first film would be the Dawn of Man sequence when we're with the primates, and they discover the monolith. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. The large structure that they see where they're living, and changes them. It changes them. And then we jump ahead several thousand years into the future, where we're in the year 2001, which in 1968 was 30 plus years away. And we can see that humanity has achieved space travel. We see space stations. We see human beings living, working in space, orbiting around the Earth. Travel to the moon is very common. There's colonies on the moon and things like that, which I'm sure by the late 60s it would have been kind of plausible to think maybe commercial travel to the moon would be something common. So we get a look at the future world, and we also get a little bit of a plot where we're following Dr. Floyd, who is it's never quite explained who he works for, or some kind of like United Nations or something like that, but there is something happening on the moon, and we learn that there was another a monolith discovered on the moon, and we get the sense like the Cold War world is still somehow intact, where there's like hints that there's still competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, but there's a hints of a cover-up regarding the discovery of this artifact, which they believe has come from possibly a higher intelligence. So that's that part of the film where we get the great stuff, where Dr. Floyd is moving from station to station, and we get him talking on the video phone with his daughter, who was played by Stanley Kubrick's daughter, and the way eating is a motif in this movie, and how people are eating in space, and kind of eating through straws. It always looks a little strange. There's like a long instructions for the bathroom, how to use the bathroom. So that part of the movie is it's putting us into this future, and with the classical music, which is so iconic with this movie. I mean, so much of this movie is, but but we get that contrast between the Dawn of Man sequence, and then when we leap ahead into at least a vision of the future. Ironically, we're never really on Earth. We don't know what life is like on Earth in 2001. We're only in space, so I think that's I always find that interesting. But then we go into the next third part of the movie, which is the main part of the narrative, where there is a space mission to Jupiter, and we don't really know the objective of the mission, but we do learn it has something to do with the monoliths, and I will get into spoilers a little bit. But we're on the ship with the two astronauts, Bowman and Poole, I believe, played by Keir Dullea, and the other actor's name I always forget. Gary Lockwood, plays the two astronauts. There's also three members of the crew who are in like a hypersleep situation. And we also meet Hal, probably the most interesting character in the movie, who is the supercomputer, the AI computer that controls the ship. and Hal has a relationship with the crew, voiced by Douglas Rain, and it establishes early on that Hal has a kind of a personality and that he is a functioning member of the crew. But then, as the story intrigue starts to develop, where maybe Hal is malfunctioning, and what this is all going towards is how the AI starts to believe that perhaps getting rid of the humans would be the logical thing to do. Okay, so what happens is we get a struggle on the ship between the astronauts and Hal, and that's really the big conflict of this part of the narrative and the story. This between AI and humanity, and who is going to win this complex struggle. Okay, and we see Hal is willing to kill with no conscience, and the astronauts realize they are going to have to kill Hal in order to survive. And once again, this parallels the Dawn of Man sequence, where the primates have to find a way to survive, and violence is a part of that. And so, yeah, that's a big theme throughout Kubrick's work is violence and survival, and all that type of thing. But that's definitely in this movie, and in this very famous scene where Hal is killed. Basically, it's a very unnerving, bizarre scene when we're in that. But it's the layout of the ship is interesting. All the chess is a recurring motif, and it's just that part of the movie is really when the plot kicks into gear. And then we go into the fourth part of the movie, where we go into the infinite, beyond into the infinite, where Bowman contacts with the monolith, and he actually kind of enters into the monolith, and then we get the big the light show that ends this movie, where we go into I don't know, it's a very mysterious sequence where we go into this light show. We're kind of in this interdimensional portal. Other movies have tried to, I think, replicate this in some ways. Several movies have. Brainstorm comes to mind, who was directed by Douglas Trumbull, who worked on the special effects for 2001. But Contact, the Robert Zemeckis film, tried to do it. Even Interstellar, the Christopher Nolan film. But I don't know. Just from a strictly visual perspective, it's really interesting in this what's happening in this movie, and we get the sense that we're kind of traveling back in time or into the future. We don't know, and then basically Bowman arrives in a throne room that resembles kind of like a King Louis XIV type throne room is often the comparison made, and watches himself age and then become reborn, and that's where we end the film. So, as far as and those are the four stories, which are all connected in here. As I watch, I've seen this film many times, and I think this time watching it, the editing of the film is something that is incredible. I really think the people complain that this movie is too slow and things like that, but I was thinking well, people will go watch a 2.5 hour Transformers movie or DC or Marvel movie or something, and a lot of it on the screen doesn't have a much depth to it. So I just think the pacing of this movie is very interesting, and how modern audiences might react to it now. I think once, like in 1968, I think you'll get a big diversity of a big variety of reactions to the film. But the way the film is paced is impressive as I watched it this time. Also, the sound design. I talked about the music, where we get some classical music, but we also get some more avant-garde futuristic music used through the Stargate sequence, and moments like that. Also in the Dawn of Man sequence is great. But even the sound design throughout the movie is just something. I did see 2001 in IMAX probably a few years ago. I was able to watch it on IMAX, and that was impressive. And really, that's the best way to watch this movie on the biggest screen possible with the best sound system possible is really the way to watch this movie. But at the same time, I think it plays on TV well. I think it does play well on TV. That's how I first watched it on television. So I think it's not sure it can never match the theatrical experience, but you know that it's interesting. Yeah, yeah. The sound design, especially like at the end of that throne room sequence, is very unnerving. But the way sound and music are used throughout is kind of what I focused upon this time when I was watching the film. Um, the meaning of 2001, like I said, I'm not going to get too deep into that. I mean, I think it's a first contact type of movie where it's clear that the monoliths are some higher intelligence in the universe trying to connect with humanity is I think is usually the interpretation of those. I know many have read religious interpretations of this movie, philosophical interpretations, a movie about technology and how technology and humanity that relationship there is so crucial throughout the movie where tools are a recurring motif. It's ironic that bones are used as weapons in that first sequence, but then later wrenches are used as weapons to destroy Hal. So tools and how technology has been used to uplift humanity, advance humanity, but also that duality of technology where it can also be the downfall or get to go too far with the example of Hal, who actually tries to maybe Hal is the next step in evolution. So that is the technological theme is there. So, and I think when I watch it, every time I watch this, it's always a different experience, and I think it takes your mind to different places every time you watch it, depending on the state of mind you're in at that time, your age and your state of mind and what's happening in your life at that time. I think now a lot of people might watch it and think about, well, 2001 was almost 25 years ago now, the actual year 2001, and we're not space travel hasn't evolved like they imagined it would in the 60s, but a lot of the technology in the film has come to pass, like we see like iPads. They didn't call them iPads then, but we can see how screens and flat screens and all that would be something in the future, video phones, so the movie was a bit off with space travel, but it was really far seeing when it came to gadgets, video technology, and how communication technology in particular, the film was very prescient on all those things. And of course, and now too with AI, I mean, I think since 2023 with ChatGPT becoming available, we're living through this reckoning of what AI means right now. I really think with when this movie came out, it was still very much an abstraction, I think, for people because home computers were not common, really not common until the 1980s and 90s. So I'm sure people in the 60s could imagine like a supercomputer achieving those types of powers, but now we are living in a time right now where a HAL 9000 is very much a possibility, and we haven't even begun to understand how AI is going to change society. You have philosophers and theologians. I have already read about there being, religions and cults around artificial intelligence. So we're really in such an early stage right now. We really don't know how AI is going to change humanity. 2001 is one of an early film to speculate on this, and I think it made a lot of very interesting points. But many other science fiction films would also offer their own theories or predictions on AI. So probably watching it now in 2025, audiences would be thinking about AI. Maybe not the space travel so much. I don't know if not like it wasn't. I was not alive in the '60s, but sure you'll have people who talk about space travel, but it's just not part of the zeitgeist like it was in the '60s. Now, we have severe problems here on planet Earth as they did in the '60s, and I don't know if people are just more, it's the phones, it's devices that are more, they're more tangible. We can handle them, and people are more interested in the newest gadgets and phones and how we interact with media and things like that seems to be, where we're at. Social media, all these things seems to be what people are primarily thinking about right now, and artificial intelligence. So long and short of it is, this movie remains relevant. It raises great questions that speak to us from a different era, but I think speak to us from a different era, and we might think about those questions differently now, but in conversation with the film, I think we could really get some interesting discussions and thoughts as far as what the film is saying about AI and all that. The legacy and influence of this film. The influence speaks for itself. I think anyone who's made science fiction films after 2001, especially a movie set in space, would be influenced by this movie. I could throw out the obvious examples like Star Wars or Alien or Interstellar. I mentioned, all any ambitious movie about space, definitely, but also AI. I think with computers, we can see whether it's the Skynet and the Terminator movies or the Matrix movies, which deal with AI. So really, a lot of the roads lead back to 2001. It was a landmark for science fiction movies because it showed that these movies didn't just have to be B movie type of entertainment. They could really elevate and really pose some great questions, and even affect culture, really have a big cultural influence beyond cinema. And I'm sure many people got into science because of this movie. I probably thousands of people. It's hard to say, but growing up, like watching The Simpsons, and The Simpsons would always reference 2001. There was always allusions to it. Many movies and TV shows. The Barbie movie that came out, alluded to 2001 just a few years ago. So that tells me that it's a movie people are still watching and still thinking about, and it's definitely still important. I guess we're over 50 years, close to 60, closing into 60 years for 2001 and A Space Odyssey. And back to the interpretations thing, there probably should, yeah, there probably should be a book just on the interpretations of this movie. I think that would be really interesting. I know Kubrick talked about the movie a lot in interviews, and he through the years he with print interviews especially, he would talk about, was pretty open. I don't think he was trying to necessarily hide anything of what this movie was, and really some people feel this movie was very simplistic in some ways, and or not. Maybe it's a complete opposite. So once again, it's just a great movie to talk about and to think about in that way. So yeah, yeah. There was a sequel made called 2010, the year we made contact. Came out in the 80s, which was an Arthur C. Clarke novel as well, and which I'll probably talk about when I get to that one. But that's an interesting movie in its own right. But yeah, 2001 Space Odyssey. Like, what can you say? You could talk about this movie forever, and probably the conversation will keep going. So, anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.